Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we continue our preparations for the State of the World Forum, which is now less than 10 days away, December 14th through 17th. So there's a lot of activity. People are registering from all over the world. We have numerous watch parties in different countries. We have, I think at latest count, over 60 presenters. We have an incredibly dynamic and full program on the four intelligences. And I am really pleased at how things are moving forward. We've had, as you all know, from previous broadcasts, many challenges along the way as we transition from an in-person event in Washington, D.C. To a live interactive global broadcast, given the visa restrictions of the Trump administration. But people are enthusiastic, in part because the conversation that we are convening is unprecedented in history. This will mark the first time where the cosmic intelligences that we all know about, but publicly are not admitted very much, is being integrated into a major world convening with other global issues. It's extraordinary after 80 years of knowing that the UFOs are out there, denied by the US government. The State of the World Forum is the first time ever where that issue is being taken as seriously as climate change, as instability in human affairs, as artificial intelligence. And in fact, as you all know, we are asserting that we have four intelligences on our hands: human intelligence, nature intelligence, artificial intelligence, and cosmic intelligences. Four intelligences and only one future. Because the bottom line is, we are not alone, and we can't make it alone. We need these other intelligences in this moment to ensure that we can navigate through the thicket of destruction that we ourselves have wrought, to co-create a world that is worthy of our children under the seventh generation. With this program, we want to explore what is arguably the most important other intelligence. That's a challenging thing to say with ETs out there and AI out there. But if you consider what is at the heart of the reality that we humans have brought the entire life process to the brink of extinction, it's because we are out of alignment with nature. That's at the root of it all. Human intelligence is out of alignment with nature intelligence. In part because we have historically denied nature in Western civilization and in Western science. We have denied nature that which we believe to be exclusively our own: intelligence, emotion, compassion, the ability to communicate in an interspecies matrix. But what has exploded over the last 50 years through some pioneering scientists, and which is now coming to full flower, is that nature is just as intelligent, just as emotional, just as compassionate, just as alive with possibility as we are. Why? Because we are nature. We're not separate from nature. Everything we exhibit is derived from nature. And every other life form that is, in whatever configuration that it has been graced to embody, manifest the grandeur of consciousness and the ability to communicate with all other life forms, all other sentience. And this is the multi-intelligence revolution that we at the State of the World Forum are seeking to catalyze with partners now around the world. This is a future that we can fall in love with, where all life is understood to be one continuum of differentiation, harmonized into an act of beauty. So I want to invite two of our presenters at the State of the World Forum to open up their videos. We have Dr. Gary Shapiro, who, along with Jane Goodall and a few others, 50 years ago or so, really pioneered with other species. In Dr. Shapiro's case, the orangutans, what is possible between humans and the upper primates. And he's going to be telling us his story, and he'll be expanding his narrative at the State of the World Forum. And then I want to introduce Saskia van Diest from South Africa. Gary got his PhD in zoology and really researched the orangutans, both in the wild, but also in captivity. And Dr. van Diest took her PhD in plant pathology and did several postdocs, which I've always wanted to do, Saskia, but life didn't let me do the postdoc. But in her postdoc, she really looked at the way humans can use sound and electromagnetism and other forms to enhance the relationship with whole ecosystems. Because in the end, we're all in a single ecosystem. So we're going to talk about nature intelligence and human intelligence today with two people that know a lot about that and do it on a regular basis, because this is the language of consciousness we all need to learn. So Gary, just tell us your story of how you discovered that orangutans were your partner for life, actually, because that is what you've dedicated your energy and intelligence to both protect and expand. And then we'll bring Saskia in to talk about some wider issues, and we'll dialogue from there. So thank you, everyone, for joining us at State of the World Forum. Gary, tell us your story.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for that excellent introduction that you gave about the forum that's coming out. And I hope that people will tune in and join us for that. I think it's going to be really an amazing opportunity. As you mentioned, I got involved in this over 50 years ago, as a 21-year-old graduate student interested in finding out if, another species besides chimpanzees could learn how to communicate with sign language. But as it turned out, I used symbolic communication to work with a young orangutan at the Fresno City Zoo named Aazk. And it was at that time I had my first opportunity to get to know uh, what orangutans were like. But you see, she was a youngster, she was a juvenile. And as I've found out along the way, the orangutans that we come across that are very young, many of them are psychologically in need of a mother figure. Aazk was pulled from her mom when she was born. At the time, the zoos did not want to give the mother the control if they saw anything out of the ordinary, and so she was raised as a with caretakers at the nursery at the zoo, and I was able to work with her. And so much of the affiliative behavior, the why she wanted to be with me, I think it was in some part she was looking to have that connection that she did not have with her mother. And this was part of what allowed me to perhaps form that connection with Aazk early on, to sit down with her, to get her to come down from her swing and to join me to exchange symbols so I could explore the very basics of this type of communication, to see if she could learn a symbol, associate it with a reference, and over time build it out into little sentences so we could see how much she could understand. And so that's what I did for nearly 2 years. And from that early beginning, I went on to work with chimpanzees teaching sign language, but I got this amazing opportunity to go into the field because nobody at that time had ever taken this technique of communicating. And at that time, Jim, this was like a big thing. We had Coco the gorilla with Penny Patterson. We had the program I was talking about. We had Lana, the chimpanzee, who was using symbols also. This was before, I believe, Kanzi and the symbols. She was using the lexicon. He was using the lexicons. And so at that time, it was really an exciting period. And so this was a chance for me to see whether orangutans could learn sign language and to do that in the environment in which they evolved.
Mhm.
So this was my chance to do that, and I spent 2 years in the jungle working with a number of interesting individuals who I got to know at various levels. Uh, again, the ex-captives coming in, they were also taken from their mothers and sold into the pet trade, and then returned to our camp at Camp Leakey, and we were, working on bringing them back, teaching them the skills of how to survive in the wild, allowing them to reclaim their birthright, which was taken from them. So this is where I really got to know the full spectrum of their emotional and psychological capacities and expressions. And so much of what I was able to learn beyond their ability to learn signs was I was able to understand at that time. And in the subsequent years, start to really understand what I wasn't seeing at the time and was coming, through me. But I was so focused on the academic part of it that I did not realize there was so much more. And that's what's exciting to me now, is to be
Yes.
able to kind of bring that all together. So in the spirit of the forum, this is kind of where I'm excited about. There's so much to unpack.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I think I'd like to bring, we'll circle back to your story in a moment, Gary, but I'd like to bring in Saskia because Saskia has really set up a whole organization called Ecofluency. And she's part of the Nature Council, which really focuses on interspecies communication. So Saskia, having just heard from Gary what he did with one particular species, talk to us by way of introducing yourself more fully, what you've learned about um, communication fluency across species.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you also, Gary, for the work that you did, because that paved the way for the whole of Western science to be able to acknowledge that not only animals, but eventually then plants and other aspects of nature are not only sentient, but are conscious. And that's really what my work is about. So during my PhD, I did an animal communication workshop. And that experiential evidence is what changed everything for the rest of my life because I couldn't do this growing up. At least I didn't know that I could, but we all have this as a capacity. I had to relearn this. And so being able to reclaim this as a skill feels as much like it's a birthright as well as a duty as what Gary's work talks about of having orangutans and other primates be able to claim their place in nature. That's part of us claiming our place in nature. So I ended up doing a few years of postdoctoral research in how farmers use intuitive communication with nature to inform their practical management decisions, where they were communicating not only with animals, but with plants, with insects, microbes, with nature spirits and elementals, with entire landscape intelligence. So this is what it speaks to with the nature intelligence. And then that informed their practical management decision making. So it doesn't replace the logic, it adds to it. So now you have a more informed decision-making process that's truly holistic, where you're bringing the more than human on board as stakeholders in the decision-making process, which is appropriate. So I loved doing that work because I got to interview farmers from various countries. And what was really interesting is how not only were they finding that their inputs, for example, water and fertilizer and labor and so on, was reduced, but their outputs were improving. So crop yield and quality and all those kinds of parameters that humans seem to find important. But so too was biodiversity and farmer happiness, for example, with their decision making, and they wouldn't go back to another way of being because now their worldview had expanded. And so I left academia kind of similar to why Gary left, because I really became interested in how much bigger can we get with this. So that's
Mm.
why I founded Ecofluency, because my goal, really, my dream, my passion, and my calling is to equip every single human with the skill of nature communication as an everyday, ordinary, magical capacity that's like, but it's magical, but it's also ordinary every day because we all are born with this. So that's now what I do is I consult and I teach with individuals and organizations and so on. And as part of Nature's Council, that's other work that you can have a look at on the website. But um, what I find really important is that this is as much about unlearning what we think we know as it is about learning new things. So
Mm.
this is really more of an invitation to a way of being and doing less than thinking we have to do it so difficultly and struggle all the time. So now I'm co-creating so many of my decisions, including on a practical level, dates for travel plans for work, what kinds of courses get created together with the intelligence of nature, because that's what I found in the 13 years of my practice works best. Because as you were saying, we have this access to the intelligence and the wisdom and power of nature. But I would argue that it's not on par with humans. It completely supersedes what humans are capable of. Because we are a part of nature, but if we are tapping into the rest of nature and everything that nature has to offer, that's really where enchantment and belonging and efficiency and practical decisions and solutions start to come about. So now I love working with farmers, for example, because we're working on landscape level solutions that are kinder and more efficient and practical because we're bringing the more than human in to those decisions. And there's more I could share about that, but I'll pause at that for now.
Great, great. Well, this is going to be a rich discussion, everyone. Let's circle back to you, Gary, about that nexus point as a 21-year-old
Hmm.
where you got the idea, I can figure out a way through symbolic communication to reach out to this orangutan. Tell us about that moment. what gave you the idea? Because to Saskia's point, the worldview at that time was that they weren't even capable of this. And
That's
Jane
right.
Goodall, remember when she even gave names to the chimpanzees, was told by her PhD advisors at Cambridge University that she couldn't do that, that's just, you can't do that. They're only an it. And yet you, as a young man, somehow took that leap into the future. Tell us about that moment.
Well, Jim, that's a great question, and I have to admit that it was a fortuitous event that I was able to meet Jane Goodall when I was doing my at my junior college. This is before I even went into this. I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I just so happened I got to meet her, and she introduced me to the gardeners who came across from Reno, Nevada, drove across to our campus. I sat next to them. I got to meet them. And later, when I was thinking about how do I communicate with this orangutan that I had a chance to work with, I contacted them. They were the ones who told me, well, rather than using sign language like what we did with Washoe, you should try another technique that was being used by David Primack and Sarah, the chimpanzee he was working with. So he was the one who was using plastic symbols to communicate with the chimpanzee. And the gardeners thought that orangutans weren't going to be as easily taught sign language because they were not as social. We were told they were not as social. They had longer hands. They wouldn't be easy to configure. They were, of course, completely wrong. But I listened to them. And instead of using the symbols that Premack used, I just went to Toys R Us, bought some children's plastic letters, and assigned them as the symbols. And it was
I
perfectly
love
good,
it. I love it.
you know. And I went in there in the cage with Aazk, and we started the exchange. It was as simple as putting a piece of fruit down and getting into to understand the fruit and the symbol and the exchange that took place. So was the impetus of starting that symbolic learning process. But I would admit that so much of what we did back then, we did not have the understanding we have today. There was so much
Mm,
unlearning we have to do for this idea that we have to impose our systems on them
mhm,
as we've done,
mm,
and realize in one sense we could learn so much from just understanding them as they are in nature. And so part of what I've learned over the years, going from the zoo into the wild, into the ex-captive community that we are rehabilitating to go back to the wild, that so much of what I've learned doesn't come from the sign language that we instructed them, but what they have taught me about being humbled by their presence, by their intellect, by their sentient qualities, and so many other things. But I did really learn a lot from Aazk. In fact, I learned that these amazing orangutan persons resent us for our being free to come and go. One of the things that I realized
mm.
when I got into the cage with her, she was so enchanted with my being in there. She wanted to play with me, and of course, my big challenge was getting her to sit down and do this exchange because that's what I was looking for. She was looking to play. She was looking for that mother figure, right? And when I left the cage to go back to campus, I would sometimes watch her when the zoo opened and the people were looking at the exhibit. She would see me and then went straight back into the night house. She wouldn't come back outside while I was there. She, I believe she resented the fact that I was free to come and go, but she had to stay in there. So these captive great apes, they understand they're imprisoned. They don't have the freedom.
Mm,
And to me, that was a very illuminating moment. Something that became much more clear as we started to explore this notion of personhood and the fact that they are very, very sentient beings that remember who we are, they remember our relationship, and they can come back later in a very mindful way to exact retribution as well as affiliative behavior. So This is part of what I learned from Aazk. Not only could she learn symbols, and she could read and write with them in a very
He was
simple way.
relational.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was the relationship that we had. And I remember years later, when she was an adult, I visited her to do a little presentation at the zoo, and I went into the back area, and she saw me, and she took some water and just spit it at me. So I'm not sure if she remembered who I was and was just doing that because she was still upset that I had left her, or because I was just somebody in her range and she liked doing that. But it tells me something about the captive situation and why I believe that we should be striving to really work out on behalf of all these captive animals who are perhaps needing more stimulation for their amazing minds. And we have to reach out in a more profound way to address that need, the psychological need, and give them the opportunity to have choices in their lives because they do have agency, they do have autonomy, and we are not addressing those very important needs in the captive setting. So when we talk more about what was going on in the field and the fact that my study was, I believe, the only one that thought about what's going to happen to these amazing students at the end of the study. And again, I was working with them to understand the principles of why they can understand a sign. But what happens when the study is over?
Mm.
Most other great apes that are in these studies have gone to enclosures, gone to, back to a zoo, back to an institution where they pine away in many, many ways. And really, it's heartbreaking to see what happens there. So, thinking about returning them to the wild or giving them a better life is to me a very important part of all of this. We should engineer it into whatever studies we're going to do and not just use them for our scientific vainglory, just so that we can write a book or get a higher position in our academic institution. Thankfully, I didn't go that route, but
Mm.
I do feel sorry for a lot of folks who did
Sure.
because they must be thinking and feeling very sad, about what happened to their, special creature in their lives that they worked with for so many years.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, on the Monday of the State of the World Forum, we're having a guy who will be talking about cruelty to animals. And just one statistic, uh, every year, just in the United States, 70,000 beagles, little cute little dogs, are experimented on.
Yeah.
And then they're just disposed of. I mean, so it's just when you take in the enormity of what you just said, Gary, and multiply it by all the lab animals that are out there, it kind of breaks your heart uh, at levels that approximate, the genocide in Gaza. I mean, it's heartbreaking beyond words, the ignorance with which humans are interacting and using other sentient beings. And Saskia, I think this is a point to, expand with you because you're there in South Africa. They've got killing camps. I mean, this is what Linda Tucker's working on with the white lions. I mean, they're taking like something as majestic as a lion, a white lion, and putting them into camps and then having these gringos coming in from the United States or Europe and just killing them for trophies. I mean, take a moment to describe that reality there in South Africa, and then we'll transition to what's more delightfully possible between our species.
Well, Gary, I think that Linda would be far more equipped to speak to that
Mm,
because she works in it. I can
mm,
only speak peripherally that there's a huge amount of work that her and many other conservationists and animal communicators have done to bring about change, also legally, to prevent that from happening. And yet there are always going to be loopholes. So we can use our human methods of preventing this from happening. But ultimately, what needs for us to change so that we're not holding animals prisoner and destroying lives unnecessarily feels like education is going to be what breaks that chain. And so many people, philosophers and spiritual teachers and indigenous elders and wisdom keepers would agree that this is what's needed for us to be able to change our worldview. And in my experience, what changes that is direct experience. Like, for example, when hunters look in the eyes of animals and suddenly something changes in their soul because they're like, oh, I get it now. What on earth have I been doing all this time? But it requires that there's something in the field that shifts that, which is why I focus so much on my work also around activism of shifting the entire energy field to bring about what's possible. Because I can batter people with scientific evidence, and so can the rest of us about animals needing to be recognized for their consciousness and for us to be communicating with them. And that's important that we do, and so on. But ultimately, if somebody's not willing to do that, there's nothing you can do to force them, except maybe try and prevent that from legally happening. So what needs to come about, and this is why this forum is so important and others similar to it, is because it shifts things in the energetic field. And this is where I encourage people to think like, to hold hope that it's not just about us affecting change. It's about us lending our agency, our free will, our creativity to work together with nature so that it brings a power. This is where the other intelligence, cosmic intelligence, and more than human nature intelligence bring their power to affect change because they're the ones with the real power. And that starts with, yes, people hearing stories like Gary's, for example, cases like what I've experienced. But ultimately, it needs to come from that direct experience. And so that's where providing people with opportunities for that embodied shift to come about, for their nervous system to be ready so that there's just that click. Plus the fact that there soon is going to be a tipping point of enough people in the world so that this shifts things for the entire human race. This is where humanity starts to rise. Hashtag humanity rising. So it needs to come about from that space of not just logically addressing it, but energetically in our heart space, with ceremony, with ritual, with holding the capacity that that is possible, and holding hope, not letting our minds, our psychic sovereignty, be taken over by by the rest of the noise that goes on. Let love reign supreme as it always does. Hold that frequency. Including grace, including unconditional love for those who are committing what we know to be crimes. Because if we're holding them in a position of shame and judgment, that doesn't shift things. I've made mistakes before I got into this work, big mistakes, and I'm sure I still do. I'm human. It's part of being human. So holding everything, everyone in that place, that frequency of unconditional love, that's what's going to start to shift things. In addition to real world, on the ground activism, following through with the rights of nature movements, those are all important, but it needs to come from a place of why we're doing this is love rather than fighting.
That's an inordinately profound point, Saskia. It's not just technique, it's disposition of being. And I think that's what's so marvelous about your story, Gary, is you had that disposition of being and were creatively intelligent enough to develop the technique. Yes. As sort of impoverished as it was. And yet out of that, everything came. So it's that combination. So Saskia, let me just ask you a follow-up question on this, because I think you're illuminating something very profound about how we humans have to change. It's an interior as well as an exterior paradigm shift. Ultimately, it's a spiritual exercise in which we have to engage in a spirit of compassion and altruism for all being. So parse that just a little bit in terms of your own pathway in discovering this internal aspect as well as the external technique. Because what you were saying around about eco-fluency is that you're learning to consult with these other beings now about taking a trip or setting a calendar date. I mean, that's pretty intricate, everybody, and that's what's available. So just take us on that journey.
So I see your question, and I'm going to raise you also answering another question from the chat of, do you have experience with avian species? So I'll do my best to answer both at the same time.
Cool.
So this path, this taking on an animist worldview, that's the best I can describe it as, which is in line with so many civilizations previously, human civilizations. So many of the indigenous traditions around the world, spiritual traditions, they all talk about how this is a path of personal development. What I find really interesting is that when I'm working with some species, actually all species will do this, but it's really some species are stronger mirrors of this than others. Domestic animals, for example, or beings who are in our immediate vicinity are very strong mirrors, holding us accountable as humans. So they will show you where your blind spots are if you're willing to look and if you're willing to listen, and if we can do this with humility. So, for example, I have a client in New Zealand, and she is a biodynamic market gardener. And she came to me with this question around, what do we do with the quails eating my crops? And quails are little birds that are living in New Zealand. You get indigenous and non-indigenous ones, and they're considered a pest to many farmers because they eat their crops. But her being the person she is, knowing about nature communication, said, I just need some help with these birds. I want to find out what their message is. So we did a consultation, tuned in. Hey, quails, what up? Why are you eating the crops when there's so much food in the landscape? And the message that we got was something that I couldn't have imagined. And this is where nature's wisdom and intelligence becomes so much more exciting than what humans could dream up. And they were saying, there is enough food in the landscape, but there's not enough vitality in the food. This is now something that you can't really measure as easily with most modern Western scientific instruments, but it is measurable if you're using really the most cutting edge technology like is used in biodynamic agricultural research. So because there wasn't enough vitality, like prana, chi, regenerative life force energy in the rest of the plants and animals and insects in the rest of the ecosystem, their fertility rates were dropping. And so were the fertility rates of bird species.
And they were aware of all this.
Yeah. So they were eating the biodynamic crops because that has higher vitality. They're clever like that, man. They just know. And I mean, we know this as well. We know, like, if as a child you're going to gravitate to what you need, but that's sometimes taught out of us because we're taught to eat what the adults think we have to eat. And there's a zoopharmacognosy, I think it's called, is where animals are choosing their own herbal remedies, and it works because they have that wisdom. And I'm sure Gary's witnessed something even similar to that. So what happened was that the quails were asking for a fertility ritual, and this farmer, bless her soul, she went forth with it. She did it, and it was pretty far out, even for her. But what was interesting is that the quails wanted the ritual to be held in the corner of the farm where, like, they specified exactly northern corner of the property. And it turns out that's where the farmer used to keep chickens, and had stopped doing so because they'd stopped laying eggs. Fertility. So when she did the ritual, during that ritual and for days afterwards, birds of all kinds of species were flocking around her, from the quails to the seagulls to the birds of prey to like little garden birdies. And she was like, okay, guys, this is a lot. Like, I get that you're grateful, but this is a lot to have you all around me the whole time. So eventually they were like, cool, we'll back off. Obviously, they don't sound like that. I'm doing this more for entertainment purposes than anything. But what was really interesting is that they didn't eat her crops after that because the whole fertility of the landscape, the vitality had improved. Plus, they had agreed to leave her crops alone, and she planted some crops designated for them that she didn't harvest for the quails. And this is something that's practiced by indigenous communities when creating food landscapes. This is what Dr. Lila June Johnston talks about with humans being a keystone species. And so this is something we can recover again if we know how to ask the landscape and how to listen. But it requires humility as part of that preparation of the interior landscape and understanding what are our barriers to believing that this is possible and then practicing it. And of course, it's a fitness. It takes a while to practice. I didn't go within one weekend to being able to do this level of work. But if I can do it as recovering academic, then so can everybody else, which is why I love teaching this work. This really is just the thing that brings me the most joy is seeing other people suddenly realize I don't have to feel lonely too either, because that was the biggest revelation for me. It wasn't just I can communicate with other aspects of nature, other species, whether it's for everyday level or it's in a survival, critical survival state. It's that all the time I now remember that I'm connected because we aren't disconnected. We talk about reconnecting with nature. I would argue that because we are already connected, it's dissolving the illusion of disconnect and remembering our connection and reclaiming that skill, because then the jump is shorter, right? Then it becomes way more exciting and possible. Yeah. And that's what gives hope.
Yeah. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh boy. And now it's within this context, Gary, I'd love to have you tell the story. And I know in addition to the orangutan that sort of adopted you as her mother, father, you also had other really emotionally intimate relationships with orangutans. And I think people would really love to hear those stories, because I think it shows exactly what Saskia was reporting about the woman in New Zealand. I mean, we humans are capable of extraordinarily intricate communication and emotional resonance that if we participate in it, our whole being is elevated and made more alive because we're honoring the life around us in a more dignified and noble way. But tell us a little bit more about your personal relationships with some of these orangutans. It's a fascinating story.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I just wanted to say, Saskia, I got so much from what you just said. I mean, I want to stay in touch with you after this because, what I'm doing with my foundation touches quite a bit on what you've been talking about, the education, getting people to see with their own eyes and transforming them, and working with communities around where these endangered species live to try to improve the long-term outlook for their survival. So, but to get to your question, Jim, I, was so privileged to get to know dozens of orangutans that were returning to the wild. I've met, I get to watch wild ones from time to time, but it was the ex-captives who were part of our community of bicultural, orangutans living at camp, coming and going, and you get to know them as individuals with names like Suswoyo and Siswi and Subiarso and these Indonesian names. We would honor the animals with names of some of the generals and officials who gave them back to us to return. And so the first one that I met, the first day I got to Camp Leakey, was an orangutan named Rini. She was an adult orangutan living across the river where she and a number of others were living. And I swam across that river. And this was the first time I really encountered this connection that was so close, to being able to literally get the trust of this animal that could hurt me if she wanted to, but instead she was curious, and this curiosity brought us together, and the trust that was established at that initial moment led to a relationship that became an everyday occurrence where I could go across, call her name, she would come down out of the trees and sit down with me for up to an hour or longer while we would do this exchange where I would mold her hands into the configurations. And then she would get what she wanted, which was food. And when the food was gone, it was getting contact. It was being the connection, because that is also something important for orangutans, is again, to be able to connect with the mother figure that she did not have originally, and as well as possibly experience something deeper than that. And I found that I was unintentionally sending off signals that suggested that she might want me as her mate. And like 7 days later, and I think it might have been, we're now under a full moon, but orangutans are affected by lunar cycles too. They have a menstrual period just like we do as humans. And she, at that time, offered herself to me in a way that was unmistakable. She gave me the signals that she wanted me to be very, very close to her. And of course, I denied her that, and she expressed her coldness for a while because I did not accept her gift. And she did that a month later on my birthday. She again presented herself in that way. So this was an aspect that I had no awareness of before I went out there. But on top of all that, we formed a very, very close relationship. And I could just tell you that, apart from teaching her the signs and being with her in this classroom along the river for many months, she and I would have this connection, this resonance, and I could feel really her presence in a way that would not be something you could read about in a book. It's something you have to experience by being out there, and it was magical for me at that point. And in retrospect, as I keep thinking about it, there was so much more that was happening that I was not aware of that is only now coming to light. It was really an amazing time with Rini. She was one of them. And of course, I think we've talked about Princess, my orangutan daughter,
No, tell
who
us.
who leapt into my arms when I opened up the holding enclosure where she and others were, and she kind of selected me. So when I was looking for a student to home rear, and I wanted to kind of replicate what the gardeners had done with Washoe, with an orangutan. And so she chose me, and she lived with me. We got up in the morning together, did our lessons, and went down to the river, and I brought her into the forest. And this was a chance for me to kind of be the mother figure she did not have, to help her on her rehabilitation journey. Because at the end of all of this, I did not want to be, I did not want to prevent her in any way from becoming an orangutan as she was intended to be, a free living, free ranging uh, orangutan that lived in the forest. And again, she probably came from another part of Borneo, but she learned all the foods that were in the area around the camp. And this is something that mother orangutans teach their youngsters, their offspring. And it goes on for many, many years. So she was able to live a life there for many, many years. And I was able to come back to see her year after year after year until the last time I saw her in 2011. And it was a really important meeting that I had at that time. But again, over those intervening years, I had a chance to come back and see her and to get her to sign to me again. She remembered many of her signs. So it's, to me, that was like the minimal part of it, the fact that she remembered it. But she remembered who I was. She continued to be, the person that she was, mischievous a little bit, interested in
Yeah,
spending
yeah.
time with me, taking me by the hand and signing open to the doors where the bananas were hidden. And she wanted me to kind of get her the food.
Mhm.
Uh, when I would put ointment on her, she would sign, yeah, there, put it there. And she would, meanwhile, with her foot, put it behind my backpack and unzip the zipper and try to take out some fruit bars that I had brought. So, they're so rich in their emotions and their abilities. And, we are humbled and, by experiencing this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and their theory of mind, because they do exhibit that. So one of the things I like to let people know in this discussion about intelligence is nature intelligence, human intelligence. They are the bridge between the two, because we share 97% of our genes with orangutans, and
Mm.
we share so much of our biology with them, and our psychology and our intellect that we can understand. But, we have to realize that they have so much more to teach us, and we need to be able to be, attuned to that. And I think that's where we can do that, watching them in the wild, watching them being who they are. And there's so much now being gained by realizing that they have, so many nonverbal signals and signs and gestures and postures, and they hold space. And we can get that by watching them as they really should be watched, and that is as
Brilliant.
wild orangutans.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
for me, that the princess experience was amazing, and I love sharing it. But I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, both of you, actually. And, all this is important, everyone, because one of the characteristics of the State of the World Forum, which was the original brand, if you will, that original template, is to transform conversations that matter into actions that make a difference. So one of the things we're going to be launching at the State of the World Forum in the plenary session, in which Saskia and Gary are going to be participating, is a strategic initiative to establish a global educational campaign and network teaching the language of consciousness. Because this is what's up for humanity. We can't co-create with these other intelligences unless we can intelligibly communicate with these intelligences. And the point that Saskia brought in, that there's an interior, emotional, spiritual dimension to that learning. And there's also tactical. How do you actually do it tactically, like Gary did with his symbolic forms, as an act of creative intelligence from the human side that the orangutan then immediately responded to. So there's an extraordinary thing. And by the way, Saskia is going to be teaching a course in all this next spring for Ubiquity University, because starting in January, we're going to be rolling out an ongoing series of courses by practitioners from around the world in learning the language of consciousness through interspecies communication. And that's what our award is about. We're offering a $100,000 award for the best proposals for how we bring these four intelligences together. And it's completely for free. There's only one rule. You have to use at least two other intelligences. We know most people are going to use AI, but then you've got to use either human intelligence or cosmic intelligence. And that's where Saskia comes in, and that's where Gary comes in. I'm going to have to talk to you later about being some of our coaches as people do these awards, because everybody's a little bewildered. Well, so how do I do that? Well, step right this way. We want to provide courses in how to do it, plus mentorship in how to do it. Because in our view, this is the central challenge before humanity at this moment, if we're going to save ourselves and co-create a flourishing world. So starting with you, Gary, I'd like to just take 2 or 3 minutes to summarize 50 years on plus.
Yeah, 50 years with
What is the essence of the essence for you in terms of communicating with the orangutans?
Well, I think the essence is they were my teachers. I wasn't their teacher. I was humbled in so many ways, and I still am. And the time I spent with them can really transform me into the path that I've taken, which is really to make sure that orangutans, all three species, what are critically endangered, that we can work with the people who are most near them in their habitat to make sure that these wonderful beings are going to be maintained in as many metapopulations as possible, using the kind of techniques that I think Saskia has been talking about in the foundation that I've been able to create. So for me, that is the essence of it. The communication that I established was really just the key that opened up something much larger.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for me, it's really to make sure that my kin, and I consider them part of my family.
Mm, mm.
And again, when we talk about all the fighting between human tribes, if we embrace the orangutan along with the other great apes, because we are great apes, according to the primatologists, we can have a better chance of saving ourselves and everyone on this planet and making it a healthier place. So that is my takeaway from what I've been doing.
Yeah, I'd want to just pause there before turning to Saskia. I think you've said something very profound, Gary, that interspecies communication is not the goal, it's the portal.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's the opening to something much deeper, one of the results of which we may learn how to get along between ourselves, more abundantly and more tolerantly and so forth and so on. So thank you for bringing that point in. I think this is a journey, not the destination. The
Exactly.
destination is much deeper. And so, Saskia, take a few minutes as we bring this to a close to talk like Gary did. Is just after all these years of your own exploration, both personal and professional, as you've been teaching eco fluency, is there a distillation, a kernel that is alive for you in your soul right now?
Yes, thank you, Jim. The first one is that I have learned, and many nature communicators will agree with me, that nature isn't angry at us. Our earth isn't hating us.
Mhm.
Nature is immensely powerful and immensely patient. It's hubris for us to think that 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 it would hate us because nature is way older, bigger, stronger, cleverer, wiser than us. And we are like toddlers in our spiritual evolution and the way we behave emotionally and physically and so on. So it's more like catch up already, but we're doing this with love and patience because ultimately that's the guiding force in this universe. And if it were in any other way, it would not be helpful. And the second thing is that you are absolutely right. Nature communication is the portal, it is the methodology with which we find deeper relationship,
Mhm.
because ultimately that's what it's about. And by doing so, we move away from an anthropocentric perspective worldview where it's about us and how nature can be supportive of us as humans and our spiritual evolution. But I've learned, especially from the plants and trees, that when communicating with them, when asking them for help, that relationality also offers them that crucible, that alchemy for them to evolve in the same way that any relationship is that space of evolution. So they benefit from that as well. And they learn a lot about us and about themselves in that communication, in that conversation, in that
Mm,
relationship.
mm. Yeah, it's
Even if it's not just,
reciprocal.
it's
Mm,
reciprocal, exactly. And that's then what brings everybody up in that raising the evolution. It's not
mm,
just about
mm,
us. And
mm,
everyone can do this. It's important that we do it. It's easier than you might think, or it's simpler. It's like how easy depends really on your capacity and your interest in it. But the devotion to it, the practice to doing that, especially if you've got the support of something like what you've described, Jim, and like the work that I offer, that's what I aim to do. I also promote the work of others in the field because I believe that a variety of options is needed so that people find their way that resonates for them and ultimately do the thing. It might feel daunting. It's not going to let you down and it's never going to be boring. It's exciting. It brings you more love, more joy, more enchantment, more hope. Do the thing. Get into nature communication.
Thank you and good night. Well, Saskia, Gary, this has been brilliant. I've got goosebumps. I mean, you have really taken this conversation and raised the quality of the dialogue in very profound ways. We're on the threshold of miraculous wonder if we only just humble ourselves enough to embrace what these two beautiful beings have been sharing with us today, everyone. And for more information, go to stateoftheworld.forum. Our interactive global broadcast will be between the 14th and the 17th of December. Both Gary and Saskia are going to be involved. They're also going to be involved in our global education initiative as we move, because the forum is not just one event. It's a process between now and 2030, probably beyond. So you're all welcome to join us and to participate in the award in any way that is comfortable for you. You can join Gary and Saskia in the after chat for a few minutes. You'll see the link in the chat box. You also receive the link in your Zoom reminder for today. But this is just so exciting. This is the future we can all fall in love with, folks. Just think of how you feel right now as a result of this conversation. This is the future. As Rilke says, this is the future breaking through us, breaking ruthlessly through us. And that's how we change the world. Thank you, Saskia. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Bye for now.